A young nurse sits quietly in a crowded courtroom, her scrubs still bearing traces of her 12-hour shift. The military police sergeant sneers when she claims her weekend job involves classified Navy operations. Laughter echoes through the gallery as he dismisses her as a wannabe warrior playing dress-up. His voice drips with contempt when he states that real SEALs don't work day jobs as hospital nurses. Just as humiliation burns her cheeks, the courtroom doors swing open with authority. Absolute silence falls like a curtain. From which corner of the world are you witnessing this moment of truth today? If this story of hidden courage resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales where honor reveals itself in the most unexpected places. The federal courthouse in San Diego stood like a monument to military justice, its concrete walls having witnessed decades of court-martial proceedings and military disciplinary hearings. The morning fog rolled in from the Pacific, casting the building in a gray shroud that seemed fitting for the serious business conducted within its walls. Inside Courtroom 3, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating rows of wooden benches filled with service members, civilians, and legal observers. The room carried the weight of military tradition. American flags flanked the judge's bench, and the scales of justice gleamed under the harsh lighting. At the defendant's table sat Lieutenant Sarah Chun, still wearing navy blue scrubs from her night shift at Naval Medical Center. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of exhaustion, but her posture remained straight despite the fatigue. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands, clean but bearing the faint marks of medical work, rested calmly on the table. Around her neck hung a simple silver chain that disappeared beneath her scrub top. The charges were serious: assault and battery against a superior officer, conduct unbecoming, and insubordination. The incident had occurred 3 weeks ago during a training exercise at Naval Base Coronado, when Lieutenant Chun had allegedly struck Sergeant First Class Robert Kane during what witnesses described as a heated altercation. Sergeant Kane sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, his army dress uniform impeccable, his chest decorated with ribbons and badges that told the story of multiple deployments. At 6'2" and 220 pounds of solid muscle, he looked every inch the career soldier. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his eyes held the cold satisfaction of someone who believed justice was finally being served. Military Judge Colonel Patricia Morrison entered with measured steps, her silver hair perfectly styled, her uniform bearing the insignia of decades of legal service. She had earned her reputation as a no-nonsense juror who tolerated neither military politics nor civilian naivety in her courtroom. "All rise," commanded the bailiff. "This court-martial is now in session," the Honorable Colonel Patricia Morrison presiding. "Be seated," Colonel Morrison ordered, settling behind the bench. "We are here to address the charges against Lieutenant Sarah Chun, United States Navy, accused of assault and battery against Sergeant First Class Robert Kane, United States Army, during joint training operations at Naval Base Coronado." The prosecutor, Major Jennifer Walsh, rose smoothly. A career JAG officer with 15 years of military justice experience, she commanded respect through both her legal acumen and her understanding of military culture. "Your Honor, the charges against Lieutenant Chun are straightforward. During a joint training exercise designed to foster inter-service cooperation, Lieutenant Chun physically assaulted Sergeant Kane without provocation, demonstrating a clear pattern of insubordination and conduct unbecoming an officer." She gestured toward Kane. Sergeant Kane was serving as a training instructor, sharing his expertise with Navy personnel. Instead of showing proper respect for his rank and experience, Lieutenant Chun chose violence. The evidence will show that Lieutenant Chun struck Sergeant Kane with sufficient force to cause visible injury, all while other service members watched in shock. Colonel Morrison nodded, making notes. "What was the context of this training exercise, Major Walsh?" "A joint combat medical training scenario, Your Honor." Sergeant Kane was instructing Navy personnel on battlefield medical procedures under combat conditions. Lieutenant Chun was participating as a naval medical officer seeking additional tactical training. The defense attorney, Lieutenant Commander David Park, a soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood reluctantly. "Your Honor, we believe the circumstances surrounding this incident have been grossly mischaracterized. Lieutenant Chun acted in defense of proper medical protocols and patient care standards that were being violated during the exercise. Violated how, Commander Park? Colonel Morrison asked. Sergeant Kane was instructing personnel to use medical techniques that Lieutenant Chun recognized as dangerous and potentially fatal. When she attempted to correct these procedures, Sergeant Kane became verbally abusive and physically threatening. Lieutenant Chin's actions were defensive, not aggressive. Sergeant Kane shifted in his seat, his expression darkening at the suggestion that his medical knowledge was flawed. Major Walsh called her first witness. The prosecution calls Sergeant First Class Robert Kane to the stand. Kane strode to the witness stand with military precision, his bearing confident and authoritative. After being sworn in, he settled into the chair with the ease of someone accustomed to command. Sergeant Kane, Major Walsh began, please describe your military experience and qualifications. Kane's voice was strong and clear. 15 years active duty, 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. I'm a certified combat medic and have served as a medical training instructor for 8 years. I've trained over 500 personnel in battlefield medicine. And what was your role during the training exercise in question? I was the lead instructor for a combat medical scenario. Navy personnel were being trained on treating casualties under fire, managing trauma in austere conditions, and maintaining medical standards when resources are limited. Please describe the incident with Lieutenant Chun. Kane's jaw tightened slightly. Lieutenant Chun was assigned to my training group. From the beginning, she demonstrated an attitude of superiority and disrespect. When I instructed the group on proper tourniqueting techniques for battlefield injuries, she interrupted repeatedly, claiming my methods were outdated and dangerous. He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes cold. I explained to her that battlefield medicine is different from hospital medicine. You don't have the luxury of perfect conditions or unlimited supplies. Sometimes you have to make hard choices and use techniques that prioritize speed and effectiveness over textbook procedures. How did she respond? She became increasingly agitated and insubordinate. She claimed that I was teaching techniques that would kill patients and that she wouldn't participate in training that violated her medical ethics. When I reminded her that I was the instructor and she was the student, she became physically aggressive. Major Walsh moved closer to the witness stand. Please describe the physical altercation. She stepped into my personal space, her fists clenched, clearly preparing to strike. When I told her to stand down and remember her military bearing, she hit me. Kane touched his jaw, a solid punch that caught me off guard. If I hadn't been wearing protective gear, it could have caused serious injury. What was your response? I showed restraint, Kane said firmly. Despite being assaulted by a junior officer, I did not retaliate. I immediately reported the incident to command and requested that charges be filed. Major Walsh nodded approvingly. Sergeant Kane, in your professional opinion, was Lieutenant Chun qualified to question your medical instruction? Kane scoffed slightly. Your Honor, Lieutenant Chun works as a nurse at Naval Medical Center. She's a hospital nurse with no combat experience, no tactical training, no understanding of battlefield conditions. The idea that she could critique training methods developed through years of combat experience is frankly insulting. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's face flushed, but she remained silent. What exactly did she claim about your techniques? She kept insisting that the tourniquet pressure I was demonstrating was excessive, that the pain management protocols were inadequate, and that the wound cleaning procedures would cause infection. Kane's voice carried obvious irritation. These are battlefield techniques, not hospital procedures. In combat, you prioritize keeping someone alive long enough to reach definitive care, not providing perfect medical treatment. Did she claim any special expertise that would qualify her to make such judgments? Kane's expression shifted to something approaching amusement. She claimed she had field experience and knew tactical medicine. When pressed for details, she became evasive and finally claimed that her weekend training involved classified operations. The courtroom erupted in poorly suppressed laughter. Even some court officers exchanged amused glances. Classified operations? Major Walsh repeated with obvious skepticism. Yes, ma'am. She claimed that she participates in classified Navy operations on weekends and during her off-duty time. When I pointed out that Navy nurses don't participate in classified tactical operations, she became even more agitated. The laughter grew louder. Kane's expression showed barely concealed contempt. Your Honor, I've worked with real Navy SEALs. I've trained with special operations medical personnel. Lieutenant Chun is a hospital nurse who works day shifts and goes home to her apartment every night. The idea that she's involved in classified tactical operations is absurd. Colonel Morrison raised her hand for silence. Sergeant Kane, what specific claim did Lieutenant Chun make about her qualifications? Kane looked directly at Sarah, his voice dripping with disdain. She claimed that she was a Navy SEAL, Your Honor. A hospital nurse claimed to be a Navy SEAL. The courtroom exploded in laughter. Several spectators shook their heads in disbelief. Even some legal personnel struggled to maintain professional composure. A Navy SEAL, Colonel Morrison repeated flatly. Yes, Your Honor. She claimed that her real job was classified Navy SEAL operations, and that her nursing position was just a cover. When I explained that Navy SEALs are elite male warriors who undergo some of the most rigorous training in the military, and that no woman has ever successfully completed SEAL training, she became violent. The laughter reached a crescendo. Sarah's face burned with humiliation, but her posture remained straight. Kane continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Your Honor, I've served alongside real SEALs. I've seen what they can do, what they sacrifice, what they endure. The suggestion that a Navy nurse who couldn't handle a basic combat medical training scenario could be a SEAL is not just ridiculous. It's insulting to every SEAL who has earned that designation through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Major Walsh nodded approvingly. No further questions, Your Honor. Lieutenant Commander Park rose for cross-examination, his expression uncertain. Sergeant Kane, you stated that Lieutenant Chun became aggressive when you corrected her medical suggestions. Is it possible that she was genuinely concerned about patient safety? Patient safety? Kane's voice carried obvious contempt. Lieutenant Chun works in a clean, climate-controlled hospital with unlimited supplies, backup equipment, and specialists on call. She has no understanding of what it means to provide medical care when you're taking enemy fire, when your supplies are limited to what you can carry, when the difference between life and death is measured in seconds, not minutes. But surely her medical training gives her some expertise. Her medical training makes her qualified to work in a hospital. Kane interrupted. It doesn't make her qualified to critique tactical medical procedures developed by combat veterans who have actually saved lives under fire. Lieutenant Commander Park tried a different approach. You mentioned that Lieutenant Chun claimed weekend classified operations. Did you investigate these claims? Kane laughed outright. Investigate claims that a Navy nurse is secretly a Navy SEAL? Your Honor, that's like investigating claims that someone is secretly an astronaut or a superhero. Some claims are so obviously false that they don't merit investigation. Did you ask her superiors about her weekend activities? I spoke with her supervisor at Naval Medical Center, Kane admitted. Lieutenant Chun is a competent nurse who works her scheduled shifts and maintains her medical certifications. There is no record of any special operations training, no classified assignments, no tactical certifications. She's a nurse, period. Lieutenant Commander Park looked frustrated. Sergeant Kane, is it possible that your reaction to Lieutenant Chun was influenced by your preconceptions about women in combat roles? Major Walsh objected. Relevance, Your Honor. I'll allow it, Colonel Morrison said. Answer the question, Sergeant Kane. Kane's expression hardened. I have served with women in combat zones. I have trained female medics, worked alongside female soldiers, and witnessed female officers perform with courage and distinction. My issue with Lieutenant Chun is not her gender. It's her complete lack of qualifications to critique tactical medical procedures, combined with her ridiculous claims about being a Navy SEAL. He leaned forward slightly. Real female warriors don't need to make false claims about their service. They let their actions speak for themselves. Lieutenant Chun's actions spoke loud and clear. When faced with challenging training, she resorted to violence rather than adapting and learning. No further questions, Lieutenant Commander Park said quietly. As Kane returned to his seat, he passed close to Sarah's table. You should have stuck to taking temperatures and handing out pills, he said quietly, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she remained silent. Colonel Morrison called for a brief recess. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah remained seated, staring at her hands. Her defense attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she shook her head. Lieutenant Chun, Lieutenant Commander Park said quietly, We need to discuss your defense strategy. The prosecution has painted you as a delusional nurse with violent tendencies. If you have any evidence to support your claims about classified operations, any documentation, any contacts who can verify, I can't, Sarah said simply. You know I can't. Then we need to focus on the medical aspects. Your expertise as a nurse, the danger of the techniques Kane was teaching, it won't work, Sarah interrupted. You saw the courtroom. They've already decided who I am and what I'm capable of. When the court reconvened, Major Walsh called additional witnesses. A Navy corpsman testified that Lieutenant Chun had seemed agitated and argumentative throughout the training. An Army medic described her behavior as disrespectful to military hierarchy. Each witness reinforced the image of a nurse who had overreacted to legitimate military training. Finally, it was the defense's turn. Lieutenant Commander Park called Sarah to the stand. She walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, despite the hostile stares from many in the gallery. After being sworn in, she sat with her hands folded, her expression calm despite the storm raging around her. Lieutenant Chun, her attorney, began gently. Please tell the court about your military service. I've been in the Navy for 6 years, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. I graduated from nursing school through the Navy's medical program and have served at Naval Medical Center San Diego for 4 years. And your medical qualifications? I'm a registered nurse with specializations in trauma medicine and emergency care. I've worked in the emergency department, trauma unit, and surgical recovery. I maintain certifications in advanced cardiac life support, trauma nursing, and combat medical protocols. Combat medical protocols. Sarah hesitated slightly. Yes, sir. I've completed additional training in tactical medicine and combat casualty care. Through what program? Another hesitation. I can't discuss the specific program, sir. It's classified. The courtroom erupted in laughter again. Colonel Morrison called for order. Lieutenant Chun, her attorney, continued. You've heard Sergeant Kane's testimony about your qualifications to critique his medical instruction. What is your response? Sarah looked directly at Kane, then at Colonel Morrison. Your Honor, some of the techniques Sergeant Kane was teaching were dangerous. Tourniquet pressure applied incorrectly can cause permanent nerve damage. The pain management protocols he described could lead to respiratory depression. The wound cleaning procedures could introduce infection rather than prevent it. But Sergeant Kane has extensive combat medical experience. Experience doesn't make something right, Sarah said firmly. Medical science evolves. Techniques that were acceptable 10 years ago have been superseded by better methods. The goal should always be to provide the best possible care, regardless of the environment. Major Walsh objected. Your Honor, Lieutenant Chun is arguing medical theory, while Sergeant Kane has practical battlefield experience. I have practical experience too, Sarah said quietly. The courtroom fell silent. Even Major Walsh looked surprised. Lieutenant Commander Park sensed an opportunity. What kind of practical experience, Lieutenant Chun? Sarah's fingers found the chain around her neck. I can't discuss the details, sir. But I have field experience with tactical medicine under combat conditions. Objection, Major Walsh called. The defendant is making vague claims about classified operations that she cannot substantiate. Sustained, Colonel Morrison ruled. Lieutenant Chun, if you cannot provide specific details about this alleged experience, the court cannot consider it relevant to your qualifications. Sarah nodded. I understand, Your Honor. Kane stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, if I may. This is exactly the kind of fantasy that led to the incident. Lieutenant Chun makes claims about combat experience and classified operations, but when pressed for details, she hides behind claims of classification. It's a convenient excuse for someone who wants to appear more qualified than they actually are. Sergeant Kane, please remain seated, Colonel Morrison warned. Kane sat back down, but his point had been made. Sarah looked like someone trying to hide behind convenient excuses. Lieutenant Commander Park struggled to regain momentum. Lieutenant Chun, regardless of other considerations, were you concerned about patient safety during the training exercise? Yes, sir. The techniques being taught could have caused serious harm if applied in real situations. And when you expressed these concerns, what was Sergeant Kane's response? Sarah's voice remained steady. He told me that battlefield medicine was different from hospital medicine, and that I should stick to what I know. When I persisted in raising safety concerns, he became verbally aggressive and dismissed my qualifications entirely. Did he physically threaten you? He moved into my personal space in an intimidating manner and told me to stand down before I forgot my place. His body language and tone were clearly threatening. Kane shook his head visibly from the gallery. And your response? Sarah's voice grew quieter. I defended myself. When someone with 60 pounds and 8 inches on me adopts a threatening posture, I respond according to my training. Your training? Sarah looked directly at the judge. Yes, ma'am. My training. Major Walsh stood for cross-examination, her expression confident. Lieutenant Chun, you've testified about your extensive medical qualifications and mysterious combat experience. Let me ask you directly. Are you claiming to be a Navy SEAL? The courtroom held its collective breath. Sarah met Major Walsh's gaze steadily. I serve my country in whatever capacity is required. That's not an answer to my question. Are you, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, a Navy SEAL? Sarah's fingers traced the chain around her neck. I cannot discuss the details of classified operations or assignments. The courtroom erupted in laughter and murmurs. Major Walsh smiled triumphantly. So when faced with a direct question about your alleged SEAL status, you hide behind classification claims. How convenient. Objection. Lieutenant Commander Park called weakly. Withdrawn, Major Walsh said. Lieutenant Chun, have you ever completed BUD/S training? I cannot discuss. Have you ever been deployed with a SEAL team? I cannot. Have you ever participated in classified SEAL operations? I cannot discuss classified operations. Major Walsh turned to the jury. Notice, Your Honor, that Lieutenant Chun cannot answer a single specific question about SEAL training or operations, yet expects this court to accept her claims of special qualifications. She turned back to Sarah. Lieutenant Chun, where do you live? I have an apartment in San Diego. And what do you do on weekends? That varies. Do you participate in classified Navy SEAL operations on weekends? Sarah hesitated. I serve as required. As required by whom? Who gives you these classified assignments? I cannot discuss command structure or operational chains. Major Walsh's voice grew stronger. Lieutenant Chun, you work day shifts at Naval Medical Center, you live in a civilian apartment, you drive a Honda Civic, and you buy groceries at the commissary like every other junior officer. When exactly do you have time for these mysterious SEAL operations? The courtroom laughed again. Sarah's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. Military service often requires sacrifices and commitments that aren't visible to others, including sacrifices that require you to assault superior officers who question your qualifications. I defended myself against a physical threat. From a man who was doing his job as a training instructor? From a man who was teaching dangerous medical procedures and became aggressive when corrected? Major Walsh moved closer to the witness stand. Lieutenant Chun, do you understand the damage that false claims about SEAL status do to real SEALs who have earned that designation through legitimate training and sacrifice? Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly. Yes, ma'am. I understand the value of that designation better than most people realize. Yet you persist in making claims that you cannot substantiate. I persist in serving my country with honor, regardless of whether others understand or believe in that service. Major Walsh turned to Colonel Morrison. Your Honor, Lieutenant Chin's testimony speaks for itself. She makes grandiose claims about classified operations and SEAL status, but when pressed for any evidence, she hides behind convenient excuses about classification. This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior that led to the assault on Sergeant Kane. Just then, a court officer approached the bench urgently. He whispered something in Colonel Morrison's ear that made her expression shift dramatically. She looked at the officer with surprise, then at Sarah with new interest. This court will take a 30-minute recess, Colonel Morrison announced abruptly. All parties will remain available. Bailiff, please ensure the courtroom remains secure. As the judge disappeared into her chambers, the courtroom buzzed with confused speculation. Sarah remained seated, her expression unreadable. Lieutenant Commander Park leaned over to whisper questions, but she shook her head. Sergeant Kane looked frustrated. What kind of game is she playing now? He muttered to Major Walsh. The minutes ticked by slowly. Some observers left for coffee, but most remained, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Sarah sat motionless, her fingers occasionally touching the chain around her neck. Exactly 30 minutes later, Colonel Morrison returned. Her demeanor had changed completely. the earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching reverence. "Before we continue," she announced, her voice carefully controlled, "I've received notification that this court will be receiving testimony from an additional witness. Given the sensitive nature of this testimony, I'm clearing the gallery of all non-essential personnel." A murmur of confusion rippled through the courtroom. Major Walsh stood. "Your Honor, we received no notification of additional witnesses. The witness was not available until this moment," Colonel Morrison replied. "Given the circumstances, I'm allowing this testimony immediately." She nodded to the bailiff, who moved to the courtroom doors. The heavy doors opened with perfect timing. Commander James Mitchell entered the courtroom with the bearing of a man accustomed to command in the most dangerous situations. His Navy dress uniform was impeccable, but it was the insignia and decorations that caught everyone's attention immediately. The trident insignia of a Navy SEAL gleamed on his chest, accompanied by ribbons and medals that told the story of exceptional service in the most classified operations. Behind him walked two other figures that made the remaining gallery gasp collectively. Master Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, her uniform bearing the same SEAL trident, her presence commanding immediate respect, and Lieutenant Commander David Kim, whose decorations included medals that most people had only heard about in whispered conversations. The three SEAL officers moved down the center aisle with synchronized precision, their footsteps creating a rhythm that held the courtroom transfixed. They formed a triangle formation behind the defense table, standing at parade rest. The laughter that had filled the room throughout the proceedings evaporated completely. Sergeant Kane's confident smirk faded into confusion, then concern. Major Walsh stared with her mouth slightly open. Commander Mitchell stepped forward and rendered a perfect salute to Colonel Morrison. "Commander James Mitchell, SEAL Team 7, reporting as ordered, Your Honor." Colonel Morrison returned the salute automatically, 30 years of military protocol overriding her judicial persona. "At ease, Commander." Commander Mitchell moved to parade rest, then looked directly at Sarah. His expression shifted to something approaching pride. "Permission to address the court regarding Lieutenant Chin's service record?" "Granted," Colonel Morrison said. Commander Mitchell's voice was clear and authoritative. "Your Honor, Lieutenant Sarah Chun is one of the most decorated sailors under my command. She has participated in 17 classified operations across 3 combat zones, served as primary medical officer for SEAL Team 7 for 2 years, and has saved the lives of more Navy SEALs than any other medical officer in the history of the command." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Commander Mitchell continued. "Lieutenant Chun completed a modified version of BUD/S training specifically designed for medical personnel assigned to SEAL teams. While she does not carry the designation of a Navy SEAL operator, she has trained with SEALs, deployed with SEALs, and performed under combat conditions that most soldiers will never face." He turned to look at Sergeant Kane, his expression cold. "Her medical expertise has been proven under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Her knowledge of tactical medicine surpasses that of most combat medics, because she has applied that knowledge while taking enemy fire, treating wounded SEALs in hostile territory, and making life-and-death decisions in situations where there is no backup and no second chances." Master Chief Santos stepped forward. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor?" Colonel Morrison nodded, still appearing stunned. "Your Honor," Santos began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through actions rather than rank. "Lieutenant Chun has treated my wounds under fire in Afghanistan. She has performed emergency surgery in a cave while Taliban forces searched for us overhead. She has carried wounded SEALs to extraction points under conditions that would break most people." She looked at Sarah with obvious respect. "When we deploy, we know that if we get hit, Lieutenant Chun will risk everything to keep us alive and get us home. That's not hospital medicine. That's combat medicine at the highest level." Lieutenant Commander Kim spoke next. "Your Honor, the medical techniques that Sergeant Kane was teaching during the training exercise have been superseded by newer protocols that Lieutenant Chun helped develop. Her corrections were not the opinions of a hospital nurse. They were the recommendations of someone who has applied these techniques in actual combat and seen the results." Commander Mitchell addressed the court again. "Your Honor, Lieutenant Chin's service is classified at the highest levels. She cannot discuss her operations, her deployments, or her specific assignments because doing so would compromise ongoing missions and endanger the lives of active SEAL teams. He paused, then continued with obvious pride. However, given the charges against her and the testimony questioning her qualifications, I requested emergency declassification of her basic service record. He approached the bench and presented a sealed folder to the bailiff. These documents verify Lieutenant Chen's training, deployments, and combat service. They should clarify any questions about her qualifications to assess tactical medical procedures. Colonel Morrison accepted the folder with hands that trembled slightly. She opened it carefully, adjusting her glasses as she began to read. Her eyes widened progressively as she turned each page. While the judge reviewed the documents, Commander Mitchell returned to where Sarah sat. He looked down at her with unmistakable pride and respect. "Outstanding operational security, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "You maintain classification even under hostile questioning. That's exactly the kind of discipline we expect from SEAL team members." Sarah's composure finally cracked, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." Master Chief Santos moved to stand beside Sarah's chair. "You handled yourself with honor, Chun. You didn't break, didn't compromise security, didn't let them make you into something you're not." After several minutes of silence, Colonel Morrison finally looked up from the documents. Her face had undergone a complete transformation. The earlier skepticism replaced by profound respect and no small amount of embarrassment. "Commander Mitchell," her voice was carefully controlled. "These documents detail Lieutenant Chen's service with SEAL Team 7 across multiple classified operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Her medical interventions are credited with saving the lives of 37 Navy SEALs and other special operations personnel." Commander Mitchell stood at attention. "Yes, Your Honor. Furthermore, these documents indicate that Lieutenant Chun has been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, the Bronze Star with V device for heroic service, and the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V for her medical interventions under fire." The courtroom remained in stunned silence. Sergeant Kane looked like someone had hit him with a physical blow. Colonel Morrison turned to Sarah, her expression transformed. "Lieutenant Chun, this court owes you an apology. Your qualifications to assess tactical medical procedures are not only legitimate, they surpass those of virtually anyone in the military medical community." Sarah stood at attention. "Thank you, Your Honor." Colonel Morrison then turned her attention to Sergeant Kane, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "Sergeant Kane, please approach the bench." Kane walked forward slowly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Sergeant Kane," Colonel Morrison's voice was ice-cold. "You have testified under oath that Lieutenant Chun was unqualified to critique tactical medical procedures. You dismissed her expertise as a hospital nurse with no combat experience. You mocked her claims about classified operations and called her allegations about SEAL team service absurd." Kane swallowed hard. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of Lieutenant Chen's classified service." "You had no knowledge because you made no effort to investigate her claims," Colonel Morrison interrupted. "Instead, you assumed that a Navy lieutenant was lying about her service record and military qualifications. You dismissed her medical expertise based on your preconceptions about what a SEAL team medical officer should look like." She leaned forward. "Sergeant Kane, Lieutenant Chun has forgotten more about combat medicine than you will ever know. Her corrections to your training procedures were not the complaints of an inexperienced nurse. They were the professional recommendations of someone who has applied these techniques in actual combat situations you have never faced." Kane's face was pale. "Your Honor, furthermore," Colonel Morrison continued, "your testimony about Lieutenant Chen's behavior during the training exercise must now be reevaluated in light of her actual qualifications. When a decorated combat veteran with 37 saves tells you that a medical procedure is dangerous, the appropriate response is to listen and learn, not to become defensive and dismissive." Commander Mitchell spoke from his position behind the defense table. "Your Honor, if I may address Sergeant Kane's medical instruction methods?" Colonel Morrison nodded. Commander Mitchell turned to face Kane directly. "Sergeant, the tourniqueting techniques you were teaching have been associated with higher rates of permanent nerve damage in recent studies. The pain management protocols you described have been linked to increased respiratory complications. The wound cleaning procedures you demonstrated have been superseded by newer methods that reduce infection rates by 40%. His voice was professional but firm. Lieutenant Chen was not questioning your experience or your service. She was trying to prevent the dissemination of medical techniques that could cause harm to future patients. Kane looked at the floor. I wasn't aware of the newer protocols. That's exactly why Lieutenant Chen's corrections were valuable, Commander Mitchell replied. She has access to the most current tactical medical research because she applies these techniques in operational environments where the difference between old and new methods is measured in lives saved or lost. Master Chief Santos added, Sergeant, Lieutenant Chen has trained more combat medics in advanced tactical medicine than any other Navy medical officer. When she speaks about combat medical procedures, people listen because they know she's been there and done that under conditions that would break most of us. Colonel Morrison turned back to the assembled parties. Given this new information, I am dismissing all charges against Lieutenant Chen. The evidence clearly indicates that she was acting within her professional expertise when she questioned training procedures, and that her response to Sergeant Kane's aggressive behavior was proportionate and justified. She looked at Kane again. Sergeant Kane, your behavior during the training exercise and your testimony in this court demonstrate a troubling pattern of assumptions and prejudices. You will report to your commanding officer for additional training on inter-service cooperation and respect for qualified personnel regardless of their apparent background. Kane nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. Colonel Morrison then addressed the courtroom. This case serves as a reminder that we should never make assumptions about someone's qualifications or service record based on their appearance or their day job. Lieutenant Chen's work at Naval Medical Center is not a limitation. It's additional service that keeps her medical skills sharp and current. She looked at Sarah with obvious respect. Lieutenant Chen, your ability to maintain operational security even under hostile questioning demonstrates exactly the kind of discipline and integrity that makes you valuable to SEAL team operations. You have nothing to apologize for. Sarah stood at attention. Thank you, Your Honor. As the court proceedings concluded, Commander Mitchell approached Sarah. Lieutenant, the team is deploying again in 6 weeks. Are you ready for another rotation? Sarah smiled for the first time since the trial began. Always ready, sir. Master Chief Santos joined them. Chen, you handled this exactly right. Maintain security, trust in the system, let the truth come out when it can. That's how operators think. Sergeant Kane approached the group slowly, his earlier hostility replaced by obvious embarrassment. Lieutenant Chen, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on. I don't know what I based them on. Your service record speaks for itself. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of understanding and firmness. Sergeant Kane, the techniques you were teaching could have hurt people. That's not about ego or rivalry. That's about keeping people alive. I hope you'll consider updating your training materials. Kane nodded. I will. And I'll make sure my future training acknowledges the contributions of medical officers like yourself. Commander Mitchell extended his hand to Kane. Sergeant, there's no shame in learning new methods. The best warriors are always students. If you're interested, I can arrange for you to observe some of Lieutenant Chen's training sessions. You might pick up some techniques that will make you a better instructor. Kane shook his hand gratefully. I'd appreciate that opportunity, sir. As the formal groups prepared to disperse, Sarah finally reached up and pulled the chain from around her neck. At the end hung a small silver trident. Not the full SEAL insignia, but the medical variant worn by those who serve with SEAL teams. I couldn't show this before, she explained to her defense attorney. It would have compromised operational security. Lieutenant Commander Park stared at the insignia. Lieutenant, why didn't you tell me about your SEAL team service? Because I couldn't, sir. Classification requirements don't disappear just because you're facing charges. I had to trust that the truth would come out if it was meant to. Commander Mitchell overheard. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes Chun valuable to the teams. She understands that the mission is bigger than individual concerns. As they walked toward the courthouse exit, Master Chief Santos fell into step beside Sarah. Chun, you know that what happened here today is going to spread through the community, right? Word gets around when someone maintains operational security under that kind of pressure. Sarah nodded. I just did what I was trained to do, Master Chief. Exactly. And that's why you're one of us. Santos smiled. The hospital staff is going to look at you differently when you go back to work tomorrow. I hope not, Sarah said quietly. I like being able to help people without them knowing about the other stuff. It keeps me grounded, Reminds me that medicine is about healing, not just warfare. Commander Mitchell joined their conversation. That's exactly why we wanted you on the teams, Chun. You never lost sight of the fact that we're in the business of saving lives, not just taking them. As they reached the courthouse steps, the San Diego sun had burned away the morning fog, bathing the scene in golden California light. The contrast with the tense atmosphere of the courtroom was striking. Lieutenant Commander Park shook hands with each of the SEAL officers. I've never seen anything like what just happened in there. Commander Mitchell, how did you know to come? Lieutenant Chin never broke her communication protocols, Mitchell explained. She has a way of letting us know when she needs support without compromising security. When we heard about the charges and the nature of the testimony, we knew we had to act. He looked at Sarah with obvious pride. She could have ended this whole thing weeks ago by showing her decorations or mentioning her SEAL team service. But she maintained operational security even when it meant facing criminal charges. That's the kind of character you can't teach. Sergeant Kane, who had been walking behind the group, finally caught up. Lieutenant Chun, he called out. The group turned. Kane's entire demeanor had changed, the earlier hostility replaced by genuine respect. I wanted to ask you something, if that's okay, he said. Those techniques you were trying to teach during the exercise, the updated protocols. Would you be willing to share them with my training unit? I realize now that I've been teaching methods that could hurt people. Sarah smiled, the first completely relaxed expression she'd shown in weeks. Of course, Sergeant. I'll put together a training package for you. Combat medicine evolves constantly. We all have to keep learning. Kane nodded gratefully. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know. Today taught me that experience without humility is dangerous. Master Chief Santos spoke up. Sergeant, the best operators are the ones who know they don't know everything. What happened here today isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about making sure everyone goes home alive. Commander Mitchell pulled out his phone and handed it to Kane. Put your contact information in there. We'll arrange for you to observe some of our medical training sessions. You might find them useful for your own programs. Kane entered his information with obvious gratitude. I appreciate the opportunity, sir. I want to make sure I'm teaching the best possible techniques. As the group began to separate, Sarah's hospital supervisor, Captain Rebecca Torres, approached from the parking area. She was still in her Navy uniform, having apparently left the hospital to come to the courthouse. Lieutenant Chun, Captain Torres said, her expression unreadable. Sarah straightened to attention. Yes, ma'am. Captain Torres looked at the assembled SEAL officers, then back at Sarah. Lieutenant, I've been your supervisor for 2 years. In that time, I've watched you work longer shifts than anyone else, volunteer for the most difficult cases, and maintain the highest standard of patient care I've ever seen. She paused. I always wondered how someone so young could be so calm under pressure, how you seem to know exactly what to do in the most chaotic emergency situations. Now I understand. Sarah looked uncertain. Ma'am, I hope this doesn't create problems at the hospital. I never wanted my other service to interfere with my nursing duties. Captain Torres smiled. Interfere? Lieutenant, you've been bringing combat-tested medical skills to our emergency department for 2 years. Our survival rates for trauma patients have been the highest in the Navy medical system. Now I know why. She looked at Commander Mitchell. Commander, I hope you understand what an asset Lieutenant Chun is to our hospital. Her nursing work isn't just a cover. It's additional service that makes her even more valuable to your operations. Commander Mitchell nodded. Captain, we've always understood that Lieutenant Chin's hospital work is essential to maintaining her medical skills. The exposure to a wide variety of medical conditions and procedures makes her a better combat medic. Captain Torres turned back to Sarah. Lieutenant, when you come in tomorrow, there are going to be questions from the staff. How do you want to handle that? Sarah considered the question carefully. I'd prefer to keep things as normal as possible, ma'am. I'm still the same nurse I was yesterday. I just want to take care of patients. Understood, Captain Torres replied. But Sarah, the staff respects you even more now than they did before, if that's possible. You've been training our newest nurses in trauma protocols that you developed under combat conditions. That's going to mean something different to them now. Master Chief Santos spoke up. Captain, if I may, Lieutenant Chin's ability to function in both worlds, hospital and combat, is part of what makes her so effective. The discipline and compassion required for nursing translates directly to battlefield medicine. Captain Torres nodded. I can see that now. Lieutenant Chun, you have my full support, as always. And if you ever need schedule adjustments for your other duties, just let me know. Thank you, ma'am, Sarah replied. As Captain Torres departed, the SEAL team prepared to leave as well. Commander Mitchell turned to Sarah one final time. Lieutenant, you performed exactly as expected today. You maintained security, protected classified information, and trusted in the system to work properly. That's professional military behavior at the highest level. He paused. There's one more thing. Your actions today are going to be noticed at higher levels. This kind of integrity and discipline under pressure doesn't go unrecognized. Sarah looked curious. Sir, I can't give you details, but there may be additional opportunities coming your way. Opportunities that would recognize your unique combination of medical expertise and operational capability. Master Chief Santos added, Chun, what you did today, maintaining security even when it meant facing criminal charges, that's the kind of character that opens doors in the special operations community. Lieutenant Commander Kim, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke. Lieutenant, I've served with a lot of operators over the years. I've never seen someone handle hostile questioning with that level of composure while maintaining perfect operational security. You've set a new standard. Sarah looked at each of the SEAL officers who had come to support her. I couldn't have done this alone. Knowing that the team would support me if needed made it possible to stay strong. Commander Mitchell smiled. That's exactly how it's supposed to work, Lieutenant. We take care of each other, always. As the SEAL officers prepared to leave, Sergeant Kane approached Commander Mitchell one more time. Sir, Kane said, I have a question, if you don't mind. How long has Lieutenant Chun been serving with SEAL teams? 3 years, Commander Mitchell replied. She went through the medical specialist program after her nursing training. The selection process was intensive. Kane looked thoughtful. Sir, I've trained a lot of medics over the years. I should have recognized the signs, the way she moved, the way she assessed situations, the calm under pressure. I let my preconceptions blind me to obvious indicators of advanced training. Commander Mitchell nodded. Sergeant, that's a valuable lesson for all of us. The most dangerous assumption in the military is thinking we know someone's capabilities based on their appearance or their day job. He looked at Sarah. Lieutenant Chun looks like a nurse because she is a nurse. She also happens to be one of the most capable combat medics in the Navy. Both things are true, and both things make her better at her job. Master Chief Santos added, Sergeant, the best operators are often the ones you'd never suspect. They blend in. They maintain their cover. They serve without recognition. That's what makes them effective. Kane nodded thoughtfully. I'll remember that, Master Chief. This whole experience has been educational. As the group finally began to disperse, Sarah stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, looking back at the building where her integrity had been questioned and ultimately vindicated. Lieutenant Commander Park joined her. Lieutenant, I have to ask, were you ever worried that the truth wouldn't come out? Sarah smiled quietly. Commander, I learned a long time ago that the truth has a way of surfacing when it's most needed. My job was to maintain my integrity and trust in the system. The rest was out of my hands. And if Commander Mitchell hadn't been able to get your records declassified, Sarah shrugged, then I would have faced the consequences with a clear conscience, knowing I had served with honor and never compromised security or safety. Lieutenant Commander Park stared at her with obvious admiration. Lieutenant, I've practiced military law for 12 years. I've never met anyone with that level of principled commitment. It's not about principles, Sarah replied. It's about understanding that some things are bigger than individual concerns. The mission, the team, the safety of others, those things matter more than personal comfort or convenience. As Sarah prepared to leave, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. What is it? Lieutenant Commander Park asked. Sarah showed him the message. It was from a young Navy corpsman at the hospital. Saw the news about the trial. Always knew you were special. Proud to work with you. The word is already getting out, Sarah said. I hope it doesn't change too much. Lieutenant Commander Park looked at the message, then at Sarah. Lieutenant, I think you'll find that it changes things for the better. People respect integrity, especially when it's been tested under pressure. Sarah nodded. I suppose we'll find out. As she walked toward her Honda Civic, the same civilian car that Major Walsh had mocked during cross-examination, Sarah reflected on the day's events. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from accused criminal to recognized hero, from dismissed nurse to decorated combat veteran. But as she drove back toward Naval Medical Center for her next shift, she realized that the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Tomorrow, she would still put on her scrubs, still take care of patients, still find satisfaction in the quiet service of healing. The only difference was that now, when she touched the silver trident hanging around her neck, she wouldn't have to hide it anymore. The San Diego evening painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Sarah Chun drove toward her next chapter, one where she could serve openly and with pride, knowing that truth, like courage, has a way of revealing itself when it matters most. Behind her, the courthouse stood against the darkening sky, its chambers having witnessed something rare, a moment when assumptions fell away, when character was tested and proved true, and when the quiet heroes among us were finally recognized for who they really are. Have you ever known someone whose true capabilities remained hidden behind a humble exterior? Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones serving quietly beside us, their courage measured not in recognition received, but in lives saved and duties fulfilled without fanfare. And sometimes, when the truth finally emerges, we realize that heroes don't always look like what we expect. They look like the nurse working the night shift, the teacher staying late to help students, the neighbor who checks on elderly residents. Real strength often wears scrubs instead of combat gear, and real courage often speaks softly instead of shouting for attention.